The man you call your grandfather destroyed this family long before any of us were born," Harrison said quietly from the far end of the table, and for the first time in 26 years, nobody in the Whitmore estate touched their dinner. The chandelier above us glowed softly against the dark walnut walls of the dining room, casting long shadows across the massive oak table that had belonged to my family for nearly a century. Outside the tall windows, rain slid slowly down the glass while the wind moved through the old maple trees surrounding the estate. Everything about the house looked elegant from the outside, calm, untouched. But that night, sitting between my father David and my grandmother Eleanor, I realized the silence inside this family had never been peace. It had been fear. Isabel stood beside my father with a bottle of red wine in her hand, her pale silk dress almost blending into the candlelight as she moved carefully around the table, refilling glasses no one was drinking from. She smiled the way she always did during family dinners, controlled and graceful, but her eyes never stopped watching Harrison. My father looked exhausted in his dark suit, rubbing his jaw while staring down at the untouched steak on his plate. Across from me, Thomas adjusted his glasses without speaking. Even James, who had worked for this family longer than I had been alive, seemed uncomfortable standing near the fireplace with his hands folded behind his back. I should have noticed it sooner. The tension, the strange pauses whenever certain names came up, the way conversations died the moment Harrison entered a room. Officially, Harrison was nothing more than an old ranch worker who lived in a small guest house near the edge of the property. That was the story I grew up hearing. But old ranch workers didn't sit silently at the head of family dinners while everyone else avoided eye contact. Old ranch workers didn't make my grandmother tremble just by speaking one sentence. "Harrison," Isabel said softly, placing the wine bottle down beside my father. "This really isn't the time." Harrison looked at her for several seconds before leaning back slowly in his chair. His silver hair looked uncombed, his denim jacket faded with age, but there was something about him that never matched the image my family tried to paint. He didn't look weak. He looked patient. "You said that 20 years ago, too," he replied calmly. Nobody answered him. The grandfather clock near the staircase echoed through the room. Tick, tick, tick. My grandmother lowered her eyes toward her folded napkin. Her fingers shook slightly against the pastel sleeve of her cardigan. And that was the moment I understood something terrible had been buried inside this house for years. Something everyone at that table already knew except me. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute after Harrison finished talking. The only sound inside the dining room came from the rain tapping softly against the tall windows and the faint crackling from the fireplace near James. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to laugh or dismiss what Harrison had said, but nobody did. My father reached for his wine glass instead, drinking too quickly before setting it down hard enough for the silverware beside his plate to rattle. Isabel noticed immediately. She rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, her long blonde hair falling neatly against the dark fabric of his suit, while she whispered something too quietly for me to hear. My grandmother still had not looked up. She sat beneath the chandelier with both hands folded tightly in her lap, staring down at the untouched salmon on her plate as though she could disappear into the silence if she remained still enough. I had seen Eleanor nervous before, especially after my grandfather passed away 8 years earlier, but this felt different. This looked like guilt. "What exactly did you mean by that?" I finally asked Harrison. My voice sounded louder than I intended in the quiet room. Harrison turned his eyes toward me slowly. They were pale gray, tired but sharp. "I meant some truths survive whether families want them to or not," he said calmly. Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside the staircase. "That is enough for tonight," he interrupted, adjusting his glasses again. "This is a family dinner, not a courtroom." Harrison gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. Funny coming from the family lawyer. Isabel stepped forward before anyone else could respond. "Ethan," she said gently, "your father has had a difficult week. There is no reason to stir up old stories that have nothing to do with you." That sentence stayed with me. Nothing to do with you. Families only say things like that when they are hiding something directly connected to you. I noticed James watching the exchange carefully from beside the fireplace. The old butler quickly looked away the second our eyes met. Even Lily, who usually spent family dinners talking endlessly about social events in Boston or art galleries in Manhattan, sat unusually quiet near the far corner of the table. She kept twisting the silver ring on her finger while glancing nervously toward Harrison. Nobody looked comfortable except him. That was the strangest part. Harrison sat at the far end of the oak table wearing faded work boots and an old denim jacket, while every wealthy person in the room looked terrified of saying the wrong thing around him. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the estate grounds. My father suddenly stood from his chair. "Dinner is over," he said flatly before walking toward the staircase without looking at anyone. Isabel followed him immediately. As they disappeared upstairs, I noticed something lying forgotten beside my father's plate. A yellowed photograph. I reached for it carefully before anyone else could stop me, and the moment I turned it over, my stomach tightened. Someone had been cut out of the picture. The photograph felt strangely heavy in my hand. The edges were worn and slightly curled with age, like it had been hidden away for years before somehow finding its way back onto the dinner table tonight. I turned it carefully beneath the chandelier light, while everyone else remained silent behind me. It was an old family portrait taken on the front steps of the estate sometime in the late 1980s. I recognized my grandmother Eleanor immediately. She looked younger, but still carried the same soft sadness in her eyes. Beside her stood a younger version of my father David, maybe 8 or 9 years old, dressed in a navy sweater with his hands folded neatly in front of him. Thomas was there too, thinner than, standing near the railing beside my late grandfather. But someone had been deliberately removed from the image. The cut was clean and precise, almost surgical. "Who was here?" I asked quietly. Nobody answered. I looked up from the photograph and saw James staring into the fireplace again. Harrison remained seated at the far end of the table with his arms crossed loosely while Isabel froze beside the staircase. Only my grandmother reacted visibly. Her breathing became uneven for a moment before she reached for her water glass with trembling fingers. "Ethan," Eleanor whispered softly, "put that away." "Who did you cut out of this picture?" I asked again. My voice sounded sharper now. Isabel descended one step from the staircase, her expression perfectly composed again. "It is an old photograph," she said smoothly. "Families remove painful memories all the time." Harrison gave a low laugh under his breath. Not mocking, tired, like he had heard the same lie too many times before. "That is not what happened," he said quietly. Isabel turned toward him immediately. "Enough." One word, cold and controlled. Harrison leaned back slowly in his chair, his pale eyes fixed on the chandelier above us. "You can hide a man from a photograph," he said, "but eventually somebody notices the empty space." The room fell silent again. I looked back down at the picture. The missing person had stood directly beside my father. Whoever it was, they had not been some distant relative or forgotten guest. They had belonged at the center of the family. My stomach tightened as another detail caught my attention. My father had been smiling toward the missing figure. Not toward the camera, toward them. Almost like a child looking at someone he trusted completely. "Where did you find that photograph?" Thomas suddenly asked. His voice sounded strained now. "It was beside my father's plate," I replied. Thomas removed his glasses slowly and rubbed one hand across his face before looking toward Harrison. "You brought this into the house, did not you?" Harrison stood carefully from his chair. His denim jacket creased softly under the chandelier light, while rain continued sliding down the tall dining room windows behind him. "No," he said calmly. "The house brought it back on its own." Then he walked toward the hallway without another word, leaving the entire room staring after him while the grandfather clock echoed through the estate like a warning none of us fully understood yet. The dining room remained frozen long after Harrison disappeared into the dark hallway beyond the staircase. Nobody moved immediately. Nobody even reached for their food anymore. The candles near the center of the oak table had burned lower, their reflections trembling softly across untouched crystal glasses and polished silverware. I kept staring at the photograph in my hand while questions crowded my mind faster than I could sort through them. The missing figure bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Not just because somebody had been removed from the image, but because everyone at that table seemed terrified of the person who used to stand there. "Give me the photograph, Ethan," Thomas said finally. His voice sounded calm again, but there was tension underneath it now. I looked toward him without moving. "Why?" Thomas adjusted the cuffs of his dark suit carefully before answering. "Because some things are better left in the past." "That sounds like something people say when the past can destroy them," I replied. Isabel exhaled softly beside the staircase. You are making assumptions based on an old picture. Then tell me who was cut out of it." She did not answer. Instead, she crossed the room slowly and picked up my father's abandoned wine glass. Her movements remained graceful, precise, controlled. Everything about Isabel always looked intentional. Even silence. Especially silence. Across the table, my grandmother finally stood from her chair. The chandelier light caught the silver curls framing her tired face while she steadied herself against the edge of the table. For a second, she looked much older than 70. "This family survived because certain choices were made," Eleanor said quietly. "You may not understand them now, but one day you will." "What choices?" I asked. Her eyes met mine briefly before drifting toward the staircase where my father had disappeared earlier. "The kind people regret forever." She left the room before I could stop her. The soft sound of her cardigan brushing against the dining chairs faded into the hallway upstairs. Nobody followed her. James began quietly clearing untouched plates from the table while avoiding eye contact with everyone. The rain outside had become heavier now, tapping steadily against the tall windows overlooking the estate grounds. Somewhere beyond the darkness sat Harrison's small guest house near the edge of the property. For years I barely thought about him. He was simply there, existing quietly beyond the main estate like an afterthought nobody discussed. But suddenly, every memory involving him felt different. The way my father avoided him at family gatherings. The way my grandmother watched him from windows upstairs. The way Thomas became uncomfortable every time Harrison entered a room. Even as a child, I noticed something strange about him. He never acted like hired help. He walked through the estate like somebody carrying history nobody else wanted spoken aloud. "You should let this go," Isabel said quietly as she collected another glass from the table. I looked toward her. "Did you know the person in the photograph?" For the first time all night, her expression shifted slightly. Barely noticeable, but enough. "I know what happens to families when old lies stop staying buried," she replied softly. Then she walked toward the kitchen while thunder rolled across the estate grounds again. And deep down, I realized nobody in this house was afraid of the past returning. They were afraid I would uncover what really happened. I could not sleep that night. The Whitmore estate always sounded different after midnight. During the day, the house felt grand and carefully controlled, filled with polished voices, measured footsteps, and the quiet performance of old money pretending everything was stable. But at night, the silence became heavier. Honest somehow. I stood near the window in my bedroom, watching rain move across the gardens below while the grandfather clock echoed faintly. Through the halls downstairs, Harrison's words kept replaying in my mind. Some truths survive whether families want them to or not. Around 1:30 in the morning, I finally left my room. The hallway outside was dim except for the wall sconces casting soft amber light across the framed family portraits lining the second floor. Every generation of Whitmores stared down from those walls with the same composed expressions. Wealth, legacy, control. But now all I could think about was the missing figure from the photograph downstairs. I walked carefully toward the main staircase, trying not to wake anyone. Halfway down, I noticed light coming from beneath the library doors. Someone was still awake. I moved quietly across the marble floor and stopped near the entrance. Voices drifted through the partially open door. "He should not have seen the photograph," Isabel said softly. "You are acting as if Harrison planned this," Thomas replied. "Maybe he did," Isabel answered. "He has been waiting for an opportunity for years." I stayed perfectly still outside the library. Through the narrow opening, I could see Thomas standing near the fireplace with a glass of bourbon in his hand, while Isabel remained near the large mahogany desk beneath the green banker's lamp. Her posture looked calm as always, but her fingers tapped lightly against the desk surface. "Nervous. David cannot handle this right now," Thomas said quietly. "If Ethan starts digging into the archives, the entire family will suffer." Isabel looked toward the dark windows overlooking the estate grounds. "He already suspects too much." "Then stop him." The room fell silent after that. Isabel lowered her eyes briefly before speaking again. "You think I have not tried?" Something about the way she said it unsettled me. Not angry, exhausted, like she had spent years holding together something already falling apart beneath the surface. Thomas sighed heavily before setting his drink aside. Harrison should have left this estate decades ago. And yet Eleanor never allowed it, Isabel replied softly. "Because she knows what happens if he talks." My chest tightened. Harrison was not simply some forgotten outsider living near the property. He was connected to whatever this family had buried all those years ago. Deeply connected. Suddenly, floorboards creaked softly behind me. I turned quickly and nearly froze. James stood at the end of the hallway holding a silver tray against his chest. His expression remained calm, but there was warning in his eyes. "You should go back upstairs, Mr. Ethan," he said quietly. "Some conversations inside this house were never meant to be overheard." Then he looked toward the library doors for one brief second before adding something that stayed with me long after I returned to my room. The most dangerous secrets are the ones families convince themselves were acts of love. The next morning, the estate looked almost peaceful beneath the gray October sky. Rainwater still clung to the hedges lining the circular driveway, and a cold fog rested low across the gardens beyond the main terrace. From outside, Whitmore House looked exactly the way wealthy families wanted the world to see them. Untouched, timeless, perfect. But inside, something had shifted after the dinner the night before. I could feel it the moment I walked downstairs. The staff spoke more quietly. Doors closed softer. Even the air inside the hallways felt tense, as if the house itself was waiting for something to happen. I found my grandmother sitting alone in the greenhouse just beyond the east wing. Morning light filtered through the tall glass panels above her, casting pale reflections across rows of white orchids and trimmed ivy plants. Eleanor sat wrapped in a cream cardigan with a cup of untouched tea resting beside her. She looked fragile there among the flowers. Smaller somehow. "You used to love this room," I said gently as I stepped inside. She looked up slowly, startled for a moment before forcing a faint smile. "Your grandfather built it for me in 1978, she said quietly. "I used to spend entire afternoons here." I sat across from her near the small iron table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Somewhere above us, rainwater dripped softly from the greenhouse frame. "Who was removed from the photograph?" I finally asked. Her expression tightened immediately. Not anger, fear. Eleanor lowered her eyes toward the teacup in her hands. "Some questions destroy families once they are answered. This family already feels destroyed." She inhaled slowly at that. The silence stretched between us while the greenhouse glass trembled faintly under the wind outside. "Your father believes protecting people means controlling what they know," she said quietly. "Victoria taught him that." I frowned slightly. "Grandmother, what does Victoria have to do with any of this?" Eleanor looked toward the far end of the greenhouse where old family roses climbed along the brick wall. "More than you realize." Before I could ask anything else, footsteps echoed outside the greenhouse entrance. Isabel appeared moments later wearing a camel-colored coat over a cream blouse, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. She smiled politely when she saw me sitting there. "Ethan, your father has been looking for you." "Why?" Isabel hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "Thomas arrived this morning. They are discussing family matters in the library." Family matters. Another phrase this family used whenever the truth needed hiding behind polished language. Eleanor suddenly reached for my wrist before I could stand. Her fingers trembled slightly against my sleeve. "Do not trust everything you hear today," she whispered softly. Isabel heard her. I could tell from the way her expression changed for half a second before becoming composed again. Controlled. Elegant. Dangerous. "Eleanor," Isabel said carefully, "you should rest." My grandmother released my arm slowly, but kept her eyes on me. There was something heartbreaking in them now. Regret maybe. Or warning. As Isabel led me back through the estate hallways toward the library, I realized nobody inside Whitmore House was trying to protect me from the truth. They were trying to protect the truth from me. The library smelled faintly of leather, cedarwood, and old paper when Isabel opened the door for me. My father stood near the fireplace with one hand in his pocket while Thomas sat at the long mahogany table surrounded by stacks of legal folders and estate documents. Morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows behind them, turning the dust floating through the room almost silver. Nobody looked relaxed. My father looked tired in the way wealthy men often do when they spend years carrying responsibilities they never fully understood. "Sit down, Ethan," he said quietly. I remained standing instead. "What is this really about?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Isabel before folding his hands carefully on top of one of the folders. "Your father thought it was time to discuss the future of the estate with you." Interesting timing considering someone was cut out of an old family photograph last night. Silence followed immediately. My father closed his eyes briefly before turning toward the fireplace again. "You need to stop focusing on meaningless things," he said. "That photograph means nothing." "Then why is everyone terrified every time Harrison speaks?" The room became still after I said his name. Isabel moved toward the liquor cart beside the windows, pouring herself a small glass of water without responding. Thomas removed his glasses slowly, buying himself time. My father finally looked at me directly. "Harrison was involved in this family a long time ago," he said carefully. "But some relationships become unhealthy over time." "What kind of relationship?" Another silence. Longer this time. Thomas stood from his chair and walked toward one of the shelves lining the back wall of the library. "Families with generational wealth often make difficult choices to preserve stability," he said quietly. "Public reputation matters. Legacy matters." "You still are not answering my question." My father's jaw tightened slightly. "Because the answer will not help you." That sentence irritated me more than anything else they had said. Everyone inside this house kept speaking like truth itself was dangerous. Like honesty was somehow more destructive than decades of silence. I walked toward the long table and noticed an old leather ledger partially hidden beneath one of the folders. Before Thomas could stop me, I pulled it free and opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten names, property transactions, and trust records dating back decades. One name appeared repeatedly beside my grandfather's signature. Daniel Whitmore. My chest tightened immediately. Daniel. The same missing figure from the photograph. "Who is Daniel Whitmore?" I asked quietly. Thomas moved toward me instantly. Too quickly. "That ledger is private." But I had already seen enough. Several entries listed financial transfers connected to land near the north side of the estate. One entry stood out from the others because part of it had been crossed out heavily in black ink. Daniel Whitmore. Beneficiary removed. My father stepped closer now, exhaustion written across his face. "Ethan," he said softly. "Some people disappear from families for good reasons." Before I could respond, the library door opened again. James entered carrying a silver tray with coffee service. But the moment his eyes landed on the ledger in my hands, he froze. Just for a second. 1 second was enough. Because that was the first moment I realized James knew exactly who Daniel Whitmore was too. James recovered quickly after seeing the ledger in my hands, but not quickly enough. The tray trembled slightly before he lowered it onto the side table beside the fireplace. Tiny details had started betraying everyone inside this house. My grandmother's shaking hands. Isabel's controlled silences. Thomas removing his glasses whenever conversations drifted too close to the truth. And now James, the one person who always seemed invisible inside Whitmore House, looked genuinely unsettled for the first time since I was a child. "Coffee, sir?" he asked quietly, though his attention remained fixed on the ledger. "Who is Daniel Whitmore?" I asked him directly. James looked toward my father before answering. That alone told me enough. Everyone inside this family measured their words carefully around David, as though one wrong sentence could fracture something already cracked beyond repair. "That is not my place to discuss," James replied finally. "Funny," I said softly, closing the ledger. "Nobody in this house thinks anything is their place to discuss." My father exhaled heavily and walked toward the tall windows, overlooking the north lawn. Beyond the fog-covered gardens stood the old guest house, where Harrison lived alone near the edge of the property. From this distance, it looked small compared to the estate. Separate, isolated, deliberately forgotten. "You are chasing ghosts," my father said without turning around. "No," I replied quietly. "I think all of you spent years pretending ghosts did not exist." Thomas stepped closer immediately. "Enough, Ethan." But I was tired of hearing that word. Enough. It was what powerful families said whenever truth became inconvenient. I slipped the ledger beneath my arm before looking toward James again. "You knew him, did not you?" James hesitated longer this time. Then finally, very quietly, he answered, "Yes." The room became still. Even my father slowly turned from the windows at that admission. Daniel was not supposed to disappear from this family. James continued carefully. "At least not originally." My pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" Thomas moved toward James sharply. "You are overstepping." But James surprised all of us by standing his ground. For decades, he had existed quietly inside Whitmore House, carrying silver trays, opening doors, and fading into the background while wealthy people ignored him. Yet suddenly he looked tired of staying silent too. There was a time when Daniel was meant to inherit everything, James said softly. My father looked pale now. Isabel had not moved once beside the bookshelf near the fireplace, but her eyes never left James. Stop, Thomas warned quietly. James lowered his gaze briefly before continuing anyway. Then something happened. What happened? I asked. Before James could answer, the library doors opened abruptly. Harrison stood there in his old denim jacket, rainwater darkening one shoulder from outside. Nobody had heard him enter the house. He looked around the room slowly before his eyes settled on the ledger under my arm. You finally found Daniel, he said quietly. The silence afterward felt heavier than anything that came before it. Harrison stepped farther into the library while rain tapped softly against the windows behind him. The problem, he said calmly, is that nobody here ever told Ethan the most important part. He looked directly at me then. Daniel Whitmore was my brother. Nobody inside the library moved after Harrison spoke. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows while the fire crackled low behind Thomas. But the entire room felt frozen beneath the weight of that single sentence. Daniel Whitmore was my brother. I looked at Harrison differently then. For years I had only seen the version of him this family allowed me to see. The quiet outsider living alone beyond the estate. The old ranch worker nobody invited into photographs. The man everyone tolerated but never truly acknowledged. But standing there now beneath the amber library lights, Harrison no longer looked like someone outside the Whitmore family. He looked like someone who had once belonged at the center of it. That is enough, Thomas said sharply, though even his voice lacked confidence now. Harrison ignored him completely. His pale gray eyes remained fixed on me while he stepped farther into the room. Daniel was the oldest son, he said quietly. The estate was supposed to become his one day. My father lowered himself slowly into one of the leather chairs near the fireplace, pressing a hand against his forehead like the truth itself exhausted him. Isabel remained motionless near the bookshelf, her expression unreadable. What happened to him? I asked. Harrison looked toward the rain-covered windows for several seconds before answering. He fell in love with someone your grandfather believed would damage the family name. That was not the only reason, Eleanor's voice said softly from the doorway. I turned quickly. My grandmother stood there wrapped in her cream cardigan, one hand resting weakly against the doorframe. She looked pale, but there was something different in her expression now. Not fear anymore. Acceptance. James immediately moved toward her side, but she gently shook her head. Daniel wanted to expose what this family had been doing for years. Eleanor continued quietly. The hidden accounts, the land transfers, the manipulation inside the inheritance trust. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Harrison gave a faint nod, confirming everything she said. Your grandfather cared more about protecting the Whitmore name than protecting his own sons, Eleanor whispered. When Daniel threatened to leave and tell the truth publicly, everything changed. My chest tightened as I looked around the library. Every polished surface inside the estate suddenly felt artificial. Every portrait, every chandelier, every carefully preserved tradition. The Whitmore legacy had not been built on loyalty or honor. It had been built on silence. So Daniel disappeared? I asked quietly. Eleanor's eyes filled with sadness. No, she replied softly. He was erased. The words settled heavily over the room. Erased. Not dead. Not forgotten. Deliberately removed from the family history like he had never existed at all. Harrison looked at me again, and for the first time I understood the grief he had carried all these years. I stayed near this house because somebody needed to remember him, he said quietly. Because eventually someone in this family deserved the truth. Outside, the storm had finally begun to fade. Pale morning light slowly spread across the estate grounds beyond the library windows while silence settled over Whitmore House once again. But it no longer felt like the silence of wealth and control. It felt like the silence left behind after decades of lies finally stopped working.